you mentioned, Todd Ahlman, and so I guess I want to mention that he is what I consider one of the good archaeologists. He's one of the newer archaeologists coming out, and he's one of the archaeologists that believes that a human remains should not be removed at all possible. We're very glad to hear that that's the new mentality of the newer archaeologists coming out.
I think too, just this removal of ocarina, people are realizing the beauty of the natural state it was in too, and also the natural cultural state as well.
I would like people in San Marcos to know more about is that, this area is a world-class archaeological site. There's just a ton of sites right around Spring Lake, and they are world-class. I mean, people think of, important archaeological sites like the pyramids or Mayan temples or Cahokia mounds. I think our sites here rival those sites. I mean, they are significant sites that tell us a lot about human history.
We take care of what we love. Jacques Cousteau said that, that's kind of a truism almost, that many people don't know anything about the river. They don't know why it's special. They don't know that it means something to them. And so I think we really need to consciously figure out ways to get people involved with the river in such a way that they develop this affection for it.
There's definitely an energy that pervades through San Marcos and to an extent Austin as well. Yeah. Places that have these naturally beautifully flowing springs that it's, I don't really know how to describe it. It's just, I feel safer here in a sense.
You're tuning in to KZSMLP 104.1 FM. I'm your host, Lauren Hoffman, and you're listening to COSMRadio, Citizens of San Marcos. Real stories of locals and legends to bring you a little closer home. Today we'll get the inside scoop on some of the archaeological discoveries surrounding the headwaters of the San Marcos River. And we'll also look how humans have impacted the river over time, as well as issues surrounding the stability of our dams. Our first guest today is Dr. Todd Ahlman, the director of the Center for Archeological Studies at Texas State University. In a later part of the show, we'll get to hear retired geography professor Dr. Jim Kimmel and Derek Lee, creator of the Eyes of the San Marcos River Facebook page, who's also a San Marcos Water Safari participant. Here's Dr. Todd Ahlman starting us off with a glimpse into the past here in San Marcos many, many years ago.
13,000 years ago, it would have been a lot colder. It's kind of the end of the Ice Age, and it would have been a lot wetter. And what we would have seen at Spring Lake is, Spring Lake occurs where several different physiographic areas come together. So if you go to the east, that's the Black Land Prairie, so it's nice and flat. And then if you go to the west, you have the Edwards Plateau, and right next to Spring Lake is the Balcones Escarpment. And so at the end of the Pleistocene, 13,000 years ago, there were some big, heavy rains. The Edwards Plateau had a lot of dirt on it. There isn't much there today, but there was a lot of dirt there. At Spring Lake, it probably was down to bedrock, and so it would have been 6 to 8 meters, 24, 25 feet less lower than it is today. It would have been down to bedrock. And so in those heavy rains and those big storms, and we still get them today, and think about the last couple of years, it would have washed a lot of dirt from the Edwards Plateau down here into Spring Lake. And so from about 13,000 to 7,000 years ago, you have an accumulation of probably about 4 meters, 4 to 5 meters, 12 to 15 feet of dirt accumulating there quickly over that period of time. So 13,000 years ago, Spring Lake, around it there would have been dirt. There would have also been exposed bedrock. The springs would have been just like they are today, only it wouldn't have been impounded. There wouldn't have been a lake there. It would have been a smaller lake. The springs we know from historical references often, for lack of better terms, were kind of like geysers. They shot up through the lake, especially when there was a lot of water being pushed up through there. And we do know that flow varies throughout the year and from various years. And so there would have been water shooting up. And people came to this area because it was a permanent water source. I like to tell people it was an oasis in the desert. And so there was always game here. There probably would have been fish, and so people came here to visit. And the landscape would have been a lot different because the lack of, not necessarily lack of dirt, but a lot less dirt that was there at that time, 13,000 years ago.
So I went to the library and I've been doing tons of research, and it seems like there are so many different types of spear points and arrowheads found that no one really knows who exactly the first people were here. Is that right? Or do you?
That is, it's true. Two things that occur along that. And so for archaeologists, we use different spear points and arrowheads to look at time because they change over time. Styles change. Prehistorically, they didn't change as fast as we have styles change today. It seems like a style changes with something every 6 months.
Right.
But we have different arrowheads or spear points were around for several hundred, if not several thousands of years, and so we can tell time with those. But once we as archaeologists start to look back, say, a few hundred years, and we get before European contact and written records, we start to lose who exactly those groups were. So we can't say that a specific group lived here 13,000 years ago, because that's a long time. On the flip side of that, most Native Americans have oral traditions, and they say with their oral traditions that they were in certain locations since time began. So, like the Coatecan people, they lived in this area, and they ranged all the way from here down into Mexico. They consider, some of them consider Spring Lake to be the sacred springs, that this is where their people came out of when time began. So like the Miacon Garza band of the Coatecan people, this is their most sacred location. And they can look at, and they look to some rock art in the lower Pecos called the White Shaman Panel, and they see in there 4 springs that correlate to like Barton Springs, Spring Lake, Comal Springs, and then in San Antonio, and that this is the one where the people are coming out of the ground, and so that is their creation story. And so, for them, they've always been here. But for us as archaeologists, we take that into account, and we try to correlate with what we find. We do see different animals that come and go. Bison, for instance, were here at various times, and they would come and go. They would be here for like 1,000 years, and then they would leave and then come back, and leave and come back. So we can correlate that with the faunal remains we find, the animal bones we find. And then we use radiocarbon dating to kind of look at that when they were here and when they were not here, when they occurred in the archaeological record. So that gives us an idea of what people were eating. Obviously, bison when they were here, but also deer, rabbits. You see rabbits, birds, fish. Again, Spring Lake was an oasis. One of the earliest excavations was by Dr. Joel Shiner. He did underwater work in Spring Lake, and he found stuff. He was one of the first. He was the first one to find stuff that dates to the Clovis period. Paleo-Indian, 10 to 13,000 years ago, 9 to 13,000 years ago. And he was the first one to find it here. And I think that was against some people's expectations. But, he was also the first one to say that people consistently lived here over a 13,000 year period. And when that was said in the 80s, I think that got people going, well, no. But, now that the work that's occurred over the last 30 plus years, it's really become clear that this has been a fairly consistent location for people to live in the last 13,000 years.
Does the university have any future plans for other dig sites and what that might be in the area?
I hope one of my goals is to get funding to do more excavation here at Spring Lake.
That's what you're saying.
We did some work here in 2014, and we dug up a lot, but we only went really 2 meters deep, and there's 6 to 8 meters of soil, and we got to about 7,000 to 9,000 years old at 2 meters deep. Mm-hmm. And then we hit water table. Mm-hmm. And so our goal is to get funding to actually dig all the way to bedrock. Mm-hmm. And that is a monumental undertaking.
Yeah.
Partly because safety. If you dig that deep, you have to worry about walls collapsing. So you have to come up with safety measures, but also dealing with the water. Once you get lower than 2 meters deep, water comes into your excavations fairly quickly, and so you have to deal with water.
Right.
We can't just pump it out of our hole and pump it back into Spring Lake because it's dirty water.
Yeah.
It's muddy water. So we would have to come up with a way to deal with that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that costs money, and then we would come up with, I think, probably over 1 million artifacts.
Oh, yeah.
And we would have to deal with all of those artifacts. And then the perpetual care of those artifacts as well, because we just don't dig stuff up, because we have to deal with the perpetual care of these artifacts, because Spring Lake is state land, and it's anything from state land is held in trust for the people of the state of Texas. So we are a curation facility at the Center for Archeological Studies, and we curate artifacts, and so we would have to worry about how to deal with those artifacts forever. One of the big questions is environmental reconstruction. Mm-hmm. We know that the environment changed. It got warmer, it got colder, it got wetter, it got drier over time, all these things. And so we're in a perfect location to have 13,000 years of environmental information. So we can take and look at these climate change through the artifacts that we find, but we also can take pollen samples and look at pollen, look at changing faunal remains. We can look at changing seeds that we could find, and so we can look at environmental change, which has a big implication as we have climate change today, how people adapt to climate change, but how did people adapt to climate change in the past, right here. We're also interested in the range of bison in this area, bison coming and leaving, and how people exploited bison. One of the time periods that's here is called the Calf Creek period, and it is around 6,000 to 7,000 years ago, and bison were in this area. And what we have here at Spring Lake is a really intact layer from that time period, and it's becoming more well-known, but it's not a well-known time period, and so I think we could help build upon that in this area.
So you said 60,000? Six. I was about to say. I was like,
no, we don't have 60,000. 6,000 to 7,000.
Okay. Yeah.
And then, of course, the Paleo-Indian period. Looking back 9,000 to 13,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. What can we add to that? And then, of course, the big question is there stuff
older than that?
Older than Clovis,
right?
As they say.
That leads me to the next question about the article I sent in the email. Yeah. Are you familiar with the research that Franz Hanselman did?
Yes.
During that time.
Yeah. They did that before I got here, but we've talked about that research in the underwater.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that? I don't think a lot of people in San Marcos know about this article or the theory.
Oh, probably not. Not. So what they did a few years ago is some coring. They took a piece of about 4-inch diameter pipe and shoved it down in the ground and pulled out cores from the dirt and they were able to look at, you can look at soil changes and see what occurred in the lake bed. And, where they worked was actually not a lake before 1849, and so this was areas where people could have used and exploited. But also they worked within the lake bottom to see if there were changes in the lake. And, one of the not necessarily surprising but cool things they found was that at some point in time the lake had been either naturally or man-made dam just below where St. Creek comes in. And so there was actually a lake, Spring Lake size, several thousand years ago.
Okay. So St. Creek, is that on the other side of the 1849 dam?
No, it's on this side. It's the creek that comes in through the golf course.
Okay.
And St. Creek starts up on the Edwards Plateau and circles down around and cuts through the golf course.
Okay.
And, when I talked about, flooding, bringing dirt off the Edwards Plateau, that's the conduit that brought it down here was St. Creek. It washed all that dirt off and brought it down, and the water slowed down, which then led to the dirt to accumulate and build up here.
Okay. To support stories of local history, heritage, and legends in the Central Texas area, please consider becoming a COSM sponsor, or you can make a donation. Visit COSMRadio.org, or if you're tuning into San Marcos, Texas Community Radio, KZSMLP 104.1 FM, you can make a donation or become an underwriter of COSM Radio at KZSM.org. Help keep community radio alive. I did mention we entertained the idea of what would happen if we took down the dam of 1849, right? And I know over time, lots of sediment buildup, lots of changes would have been done.
The dam has issues right now. The floods from last year damaged the dam. And so there's actually water flowing underneath the dam. And the university is looking at ways to basically not necessarily repair it, but stabilize the dam. But what has happened with the water flowing underneath the dam is endangered species like the fountain darter have moved in to those locations. So the university, as part of the Endangered Species Act, can't necessarily do that. Just get rid of the dam. There has to be a plan because it's now home to endangered species, and there are endangered species in the lake. Spring Lake and just below the dam are the only location for the Texas wild rice. And so removing the dam could potentially damage or even take away that habitat. So there's all these species and environmental issues. And then, as a historic structure, what remains of the original 1849 dam or subsequent rebuilds or additions to it? Does the dam meet the criteria for eligibility for the National Register of Historic Places? Is it a historic property? So there's a lot of issues that come into play beyond just, we should get rid of the dam. Getting rid of the dam may damage habitat. The dam may have historical importance. So there's a lot of issues that the university has to take into account. And then there's the issue of it's not necessarily stable. So if it stays in its current configuration and we get another October 2015 flood where it was topped by 3 or 4 feet of water, does that mean that the dam busts? Does it break and flood downriver and cause damage beyond in species and historic properties, but damage to San Marcos?
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of questions around that, and it's just something to think about. Let's see. So, are there any wishes that you have that you would like the city and the public to know? Anything at all about this area, about what you're doing?
Well, I think one of the things I really wish I would like people in San Marcos to know more about is that this area is a world-class archaeological site. You know, there's just a ton of sites right around Spring Lake, and they are world-class. I mean, you know, people think of, you know, important archaeological sites like the pyramids or you know, Mayan temples or Cahokia mounds. I think our sites here rival those sites. I mean, they are significant sites that tell us a lot about human history. And then you move beyond that, there are a lot of sites in the city of San Marcos, archaeological, prehistoric, and historic sites, that as San Marcos grows and there's more development, all of these sites are going to be damaged or destroyed. And we lose a lot of our information about prehistory and history. So we need to keep that in mind as San Marcos grows. And, you know, as one of the fastest growing cities in the country, development is always pushing pressure on these sites. And so we have to remind ourselves that archaeology, in my opinion, is just as important as, say, endangered species or endangered whatever, that we need to keep that in mind and take archaeology and history and prehistory into account as we work.
Back when I took an archaeology class, I remember them going briefly over a little bit of the things you have to do to work with the city and certain projects. And it's, at least from my memory, it seemed like archaeologists have to go in before they do a big project to kind of do a sweep or whatever. Are we doing that in San Marcos at all?
Well, it depends on the type of project. So if it involves a federal dollars, a federal license, or it occurs on federal land, then that would require compliance with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. And that requires federal agencies to take into account the effects of their actions, their undertakings on historic properties. In Texas, we have the Texas Antiquities Code, and that requires state agencies, cities, counties who are doing work on their land, or if they are giving a license to somebody to do something, to do archaeology, because they have to see if there's a state antiquities landmark that's going to be damaged by their project, so they have to do archaeology. In San Marcos, there is a code that requires a survey to be done for development. It's a very weak code, and I think even some of the city people recognize that, and they've tried to update the code to be a little more progressive. The city of San Antonio has a very progressive code that requires archaeology, or at least an archaeological review, and they have city archaeologists in San Antonio who review projects, and they also have contractors who do that that stuff too. So if there's going to be a big development that might impact archaeology in the city of San Antonio, they may require the developer to do archaeology beforehand. And we don't necessarily have that code in San Marcos.
You would think.
And I think that there's two sides to that. You know, there's the historic preservation side that says we should do that, and then there's the side of development that says that costs a lot of money and slows us down. You know, we're a fast-growing city, and so we need to build these houses and stuff to make sure that we house the people that are coming to San Marcos. And so you have to balance that out. Outside of, you know, that involves federal dollars or state dollars.
Well, hopefully we can kind of get the word out, and maybe we can make some changes. I think that I know that this place is not just dear to me and you, but to a lot of people. And, you know, we would love to find out more information about our history here.
Yeah. Well, you know, we also, you know, another way people can find out besides the website I mentioned is we have an exhibit here in the Discovery Hall at Spring Lake. That we just had installed in April, and it has a nice timeline about Spring Lake. It has a bunch of the artifacts that we found on display. It shows when the bison were here, so if people want to see about that. We had an artist come in. He's an archaeological artist. He's an archaeologist who's an artist. Does it all, brings it all together. We brought him in, and he's done some reconstructions, hunting bison and making stone tools and cooking hearths and stuff like that. So
I'm kind of curious as to who this artist is, if he's local or...
No, he's not local. He's a friend of mine named Eric Carlson.
Okay.
And he's done a lot of work for the last 20 years. We do have a website that is just gone live today, and we'll be advertising it through our social media at the Center for Archeological Studies.
Feel free to tell us what it is.
So we from our work from 2 years ago, we rather than writing a boring technical report that would go down to the shelves of a few archaeologists, we've created a website that talks about our findings, and so that anyone in San Marcos or around the world can find out what we did and what we found. Our goal is to actually update the website as we find more and more information, so that people should come back to the website every month or two, rather than just going to visit it once and go, oh, I'm done, because we're going to continually add information.
Let COSMRadio entertain you while you put away your dishes or fold laundry, or maybe you're working on an art piece or a crossword puzzle. Please consider becoming a COSM sponsor or make a donation. Visit COSMRadio.org, or if you're tuning into San Marcos, Texas Community Radio, KZSMLP 104.1 FM, you can make a donation or become an underwriter of COSM Radio at KZSM.org. Help keep community radio alive. Let's go back, roughly 12 to 19,000 years ago. In fact, it could be that humans have been in the San Marcos area even longer. Imagine being the first person to set your eyes upon the river, to sink your foot into the riverbank, to watch the springs coming from the ground. Such a lucky spot. For a moment, there's a sigh of relief. You quench your thirst, hunt your game, and rest. In fact, it's at that moment the relationship between humans and nature change, whether it's to survive, to make energy, or to use it as recreation. The river has been our friend for so long. Some believe it's even the birthplace of humanity. To elaborate on cultural ecology, or this relationship between humans and nature, we will be speaking with longtime resident and retired Texas State Geography professor, Dr. Jim Kimmel. Also included in the interview is Derek Lee, a previous student of Dr. Kimmel's who started the Eyes of the San Marcos River Facebook page. Here's Dr. Kimmel.
I have always been interested in the big picture, the really long-term, broad sort of things, and that's how I ended up as a cultural ecologist. I don't know if it's 6th or 7th generation Texan. My ancestors came here in the 1820s, and I have never really taken the time. In fact, I don't even know how to count, how many generations there are. But I remember early on, before I started to school, my dad was manager of a lumberyard in a little town called Bynum, Texas, northeast of Waco. And we would go for drives on Sunday afternoon. And my parents were both curious, very intelligent people, both from old Texas families. And they would drive along and they would say, wow, I wonder what this looked like before the white people came here. Or they would say, look at that German farmer's field over there. Look how clean it is. And so they were talking about the land and how people fit into the land, how they shaped the land, how they shaped themselves to fit into the land. And that's cultural ecology. Cultural ecology, really, its focus is humans' relationship with the earth. And it involves all the biophysical, ecological things, but it also involves all the cultural things. I'm a teacher, and I teach in the classroom, but I prefer to teach outside, have people a chance to see what they're talking about, to experience it in a way that you just cannot in the classroom. So I started a program at Texas State in 1997 we called it Nature and Heritage Tourism. It's basically ecotourism, but tourism that's aimed to give people those kind of really intense outdoor experiences. Geography is everywhere. And so I have tried to focus on my own place to try to help people understand it. That was the purpose of the San Marcos River book. It's called the San Marcos, A River's Story. One of my interests in rivers, probably my primary interest in rivers, is how they serve as a learning venue. Not only the river, but its watershed, everything that goes on in there. Again, as a cultural ecologist, I like this holistic stuff. I like to pull everything together. And a watershed lets you do that. That's the reason I started the course in river basin management at the university, because geography claims to be holistic, but holism is very hard to do. And I thought, okay, you know, as a way to be holistic, if you take a river and you take its watershed, there you've got a holistic system that you can draw a circle or you can draw a line around it and say, okay, we're going to study everything that's in here, which even that's hard to do. But a river is it offers opportunities for all kinds of science. You know, we have what we call STEM now, the science, technology, engineering, and math education. Virtually everything about a river involves those things, but also the humanities. I mean, we've got music and literature and politics, all those things that a river gives you an opportunity to get into.
But what brought humans here in the first place?
Water.
Yeah, obviously.
I wrote a little piece in the San Marcos book, little fictional piece, obviously, about people discovering the springs.
Yeah.
And walking across this hot prairie in August, and you know, they were thirsty and hungry, and they smelled water, and they went running to it, because we don't have a lot of water here, but those springs have been so prolific and so attractive for eons.
And if I can chime in here,
yes.
Something that I've noticed that probably, you know, I picked up out of, you know, your cultural teachings, is that I've noticed that cultural patterns of humans tend to follow the same routes. Like I-35 really almost kind of follows the same routes that Native Americans probably walk. I mean, give or take, you know, a couple 100,000 yards, but you know, they typically follow the same routes, because if you follow up from San Antonio through New Braunfels, through San Marcos, up through to Austin, and wherever that Edwards Plateau kind of ends right there, that's, you know, that was that kind of dividing ground.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that there were springs all along there that were coming from the base of the plateau. So those routes were going from waterhole to waterhole.
And I think it's very interesting. It's something that a lot of people probably overlook, that there's all this history that San Marcos has, but if you drive up Old Stagecoach towards 5 Mile, that's another prevalent spot.
Derek has played a huge part in our community. He advocates for a clean river and has taken time out of his day to clean up trash and advocate for a trash-free river. So let's see what he has to say and listen in on his journey.
So I studied geography. I was a resource and environmental studies major. I actually had a class with Dr. Kimmel here, and I think it was towards the end of my stint at Texas State, but it was definitely one of the most enriching classes I probably took. A lot of stuff I've, I guess, unconsciously used since I've taken that class at this point, now that you start to talk about it again. But I guess upon graduating, I got into the tree industry field via the Habitat Conservation Plan, which the city had been talking about for years and years and years. And I was on the private contractor side, working with Vincent DeBrock at Heritage Tree Care, and that was my introduction to really riparian work in a sense, and management of riparian systems and watersheds and all that. I mean, I'd always been kind of a avid lover, even as a kid, of creeks and rivers. And when I was 10 years old, we had a small creek flowing through the town that I grew up in, and I was just one of those kids of, I want to see where this thing starts and ends. So that's what I used to do when I was a kid. So it's kind of waters and rivers, and their entire system has always been something that's just fascinated me. What that has kind of morphed into since I've graduated is not only, career-wise, but just community organization-wise. Me and a buddy helped start the Eyes of the San Marcos River about 3 years ago, which I think when we first started, we didn't think it was going to become really what it's become in a sense. And we were just trying to address a problem, but it was a problem that I think a lot of people had issues with and wanted to discuss. And we've now been able to start kind of a public forum, for good or for bad sometimes, but it gets people talking about these issues and realizing what needs to be done, what we can do, what we've done as a volunteer group. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes things haven't panned out like we wanted them to. Sometimes the arguments are a bit, much on the forum, but I think it's healthy for people to be debating like that, instead of just people thinking that the government or this entity is making the decisions without any say-so.
So here, Derek will go into detail about the water safari, and it's known to be the world's toughest canoe race. And here he is to explain more details about it.
Well, the water safari is a race that's been going on. I think this will be the 52nd year this year, or 53rd. Not exactly sure. But it's been going on since the late 60s, or mid-60s, late 60s. And it's a race that starts here at the headwaters. It's traditionally always started, I think, in Spring Lake, and on some occasions when work's being done on the lake or something, they've started it in like City Park or something. But it goes from San Marcos all the way, joins with the Guadalupe, and that goes all the way to Seadrift, which is down in the Gulf of Mexico, basically. And it's billed as the world's toughest canoe race. There might be some competing races at this point that have that name as well, but I like it because it's kind of it can be an adventure or it can be a race. If you're really athletic and competitive, it can be a very interesting thing, to be moving 10 miles an hour on the water with just human power. But it's also something for people who just want to maybe push themselves a little hard. I, for many years, before I even did the safari, it was one of, like I was mentioned to you earlier, I just like to explore rivers. For like 4 years before I ever did the safari, I would take about a week, sometimes 2 off, and just go down the river and camp along the banks. And about 4 years ago, it was kind of a dream of mine to actually do the race one year, and had a few injuries that set me back. But once I kind of recovered from that financially, I bought a boat and made it down there solo for my first time. And it doesn't seem like it would be this inspiring, make you cry kind of moment, but it really is when you've pushed your body as further than you think you can go. And you're sleep deprived, and there's just, I don't know, it's the whole support group. That's another thing about the community of paddlers, is that there's a support group behind everyone. Like, even though everyone's competitive, everyone still is watching out for one another out there. I've got so many people that I would call family at this point that I paddle with, because they're just good people. They're good people that care about the river. They care about the health of the river, safety of the paddlers that are out there. There's an award that the safari gives out every year now for people, somebody who's went out of their way. You might be in first place, but if that person's drowning and you stop to help them, and you've given up your whole race, then they have I forget what the name of the award is, but it's kind of just like a humanitarian award, just to acknowledge the fact that somebody, may have forfeited their race to help somebody in need. So it's a great support group. It's a great way to see the river. It's a fast way to see the river.
Thank you for tuning in to KZSMLP 104.1 FM. The song you're listening to is called Cheshire Cats by Heroic Dose. We'd like to thank them for providing some tunes for our soundscape. And here's Derek Lee. You went alone on these particular trips, or did you have a partner?
With all my camping trips, I always went with somebody.
Okay.
I've done the safari solo twice now.
Tell me one of your favorite stories of being by you went alone on these particular trips, or did you have a partner?
With all my camping trips, I always went with somebody. I've done the safari solo twice now.
Okay.
And that gets interesting.
Yeah.
I guess probably, I don't know how interesting it is, but there's stories about people hallucinating, and I've never really hallucinated out there, but last year I definitely did see figures in the trees, and not from not like a human figure. It would be just the way at nighttime your light would play off of like the silhouette of a tree. I saw, I think, Elvis. I saw Elvis's silhouette, and I think I saw like Goofy.
So what places have you scored in this?
I think last year I got like 38th out of 90. The other year I did it solo, I got like 54 out of 100 and something. So,
but you finish it.
But I finish it.
Yeah.
So that's
I know.
at some point when you're out there and you know that you're not going to catch the person in front of you, that's when you just kind of sit back and just go at the pace where you know you're going to finish, so that you don't like kill your body.
In 2015, Central Texas had 2 devastating floods. The Memorial Day flood produced about 10 inches in Wimberley, and the San Marcos Airport reported about 6 inches during the Halloween flood, up to 10 inches in other areas. Derek goes into detail about his observations from the river since then.
Recently, it flows into the San Marcos. So I still consider it part of that whole watershed.
Right.
And one thing that I did find out that was very interesting for me this year was about a couple weeks ago. I put in at Blanco State Park, which is pretty much towards the beginning. There's a couple miles west of it, but it's practically the beginning of the Blanco River up there. And I paddled all the way down in sections over the past year looking at flood damage. And what I've noticed is the spots that were like really narrowed out. So like when you come through the narrows, and it gets really tiny, the velocity of the water increased. I think probably exponentially. I don't know, but you get above the narrows, not a whole lot of damage. Below the narrows, down to like Martindale, it's just just crazy devastation.
Trees just bent over, and
so the velocity of the water due to the canyon walls way further up the Blanco River increased that velocity, plus reports that I've been getting about Fisher Store Road acting as almost a dam. That's why it got lifted up like that and set. I'm sure you saw I saw videos or pictures, and I'm sure the people listening can look up pictures, but I've heard from people that live in that area that it basically stopped water, and when it broke and cracked in two and got pushed to the side, you had that wall of water that just rushed from
another flood almost.
Well, I mean, it was already flooding,
yeah.
But that's why the water rose in Wimberley so fast, and that's why it rose. I don't know what the timetable was for the Memorial Day flood because I wasn't in San Marcos. I don't know how fast that water rose in San Marcos, but I've heard in Wimberley it rose probably 30 feet in like an hour. Okay. Which is it's fast. Yeah. So I mean, it's just enough time for people to get what you need and get out, and unfortunately a lot of people didn't. But as you get further down the river, you get down past Luling and Gonzales and all those areas, even though, there's not a central hub of education, they've actually done pretty good planning as far as like keeping development away from the river.
Yeah.
They've just got really wide basins down there.
Huh?
I guess so, from the past, but there wasn't a whole lot of flood damage. You see it on the banks and up in the trees, but as far as people's houses getting flooded and washed away off their foundations, that that kind of only happened up here and maybe a little bit in San Marcos.
I can't remember. Did the safari happen last year as well?
It did.
So it happened between the two floods, right?
It got postponed twice, and that's looking like what might happen again this year.
Huh.
So a lot of people really want to run it in these high waters, but due to kind of insurance and legal issues these last couple of years, they've can't really do it. It's kind of unfortunate because, you know, some of the top racers really want to break some records. I don't care.
Yeah, you
but
just enjoy it.
It would be nice to get down there quicker.
COSM is all about Texas heritage and history, so come check out one of our sponsors, Riley's Tavern. It's one of the oldest bars in Central Texas with the very first liquor license after Prohibition. It's located about 2 miles from the York Creek exit off of I-35. There's live music, drink specials, a beer garden, pool tables, and lots of honky-tonk. Go to COSMRadio.org to find out how you can become a sponsor for this podcast. So the next issue I wanted to bring up is the dam at Capes Camp, or Thompson's Island. Many residents are familiar with the history of it, which I'll let Dr. Kimmel elaborate on, but in 2015, 2 great floods damaged this historic structure. The science seems to indicate that we should relieve the river, but because of its historic presence and the recreation the mill race serves to so many, it's debated that we should keep it. The Community Impact newspaper had a quote from the San Marcos city manager, Jared Miller, which stated that for taxpayers, we'd be spending a significant expense that would cost the city more than $1 million if we kept it. However, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would remove the dam at no cost to the city. And it would be a grant that would cost about $35,000, but as Brian Olson mentions in the San Marcos Mercury, federal funds like this grant can't be applied to remove anything listed on the National Historic Register, something that applies to Capes Dam. So, what should we do? Should we keep it? Should we let the river flow free? Let's listen to what Derek Lee and Dr. Jim Kimmel have to say about it.
The dam historically was, I guess, used for a mill back in the day at Thompson's Island and at the Capes area. And, you know, that was almost 120 years ago. I'm not 100% sure when it became non-functional. It's a beautiful area. I totally understand why people love and want to keep it there. But at this point, since it was given to the city as part of the Woods donation for parkland, which is a whole nother debate that we can have. But since then, and with me also being on the Parks Board now, you know, I understand that, like, with that issue with the dam, there's not a do-nothing option here. You either have to spend a lot of money to repair it and make it this awesome water park, or you have to tear it out. But you can't just leave this dangerous thing that's sticking up out of the water, because it can be a very beautiful park, I think, in the future, whenever it gets cleaned up and is actually a usable park. But the condition it's in right now, it's unsafe. There's also been claims of, you know, there's species that live behind the dam, you know, such as the fountain darter and all these that actually prefer the still deep water. I'm not a scientist and I don't study those, so I'm not going to claim one way or the other on that. But I can tell you from a visual aspect that over the past 5 years, the sediment buildup behind that dam has almost completely closed the mill race off itself. Okay. It's about less than 6 inches deep.
Stagnant. I mean,
it's still moving a little bit, but if we just keep kind of getting these decent floods like this from time to time, I mean, whether we take it out or not, it's going to end up closing itself off.
Right.
There's not going to be water in there.
Those dams were pieced together. The one that formed Spring Lake was typically they would build them out of cedar logs and rocks piled in those, and then dirt piled over that. And of course they'd get washed away every 2 or 3 years, and then they'd rebuild it, and then they'd start putting concrete and rebar, and so there's no telling what's in there. They're very, very hazardous. As I was doing research for the San Marcos River book, historical research, I found that based on records, tax records and so forth from those times, there was a dam about every mile and a half on the river. You can remove dams, and when you remove one, particularly one that's been there that long, it really looks ugly to begin with, because when the water level lowers, you've got a lot of silt, sediment, junk that's there, vegetation that dies, and all those kind of things. So it really looks bad for a while. But in a few years, after a few floods and things kind of scour some of that out, nature heals itself very, very quickly. And my watchword about dams is that a dam doesn't do a damn good thing for a river. There's just no way that a dam benefits a river. Dams benefit people, and sometimes it is a very legitimate balance to say, okay, we gain enough benefits from this that we're going to modify the river substantially in order to get the benefits from it we need. We would be in very bad shape for drinking water and all kinds of things if we didn't have the dams we have.
And in the past, that could be weighed out more evenly, because especially, I don't know if any of these dams were electrical dams in a sense, but Atin, which was taken out this year down past Luling, it was a grist mill, it was a sawmill. It provided the town of like 50 people some of the first electricity in Texas because of that dam. And that's a use for a dam during its time. Yeah. That I could see being legitimate, because it made people's lives better.
Right. But are we using any of them anymore?
No.
Any of them?
No, none of those.
So.
And there's another thing that happens too with a dam, that when you slow down the flow of water, you lose water to the river system. Some of it, quite a bit of it, gets absorbed by the soil, but more than that, you have a lot of evaporation, because you spread out. You increase the surface there, and it's usually fairly still, and the sun's shining on it. Here in Texas, it's hot. I know with some of the dams that I looked at on the Brazos River, they lose 5 feet of water per year to evaporation. And that you don't see that happening at the reservoir, the lake so called there, because it's continually filled up. But you greatly increase evaporation, which means that you reduce the amount of water that ultimately makes it to the estuary. Because one of the main functions of the San Marcos River is to supply water to the Guadalupe, which goes into San Antonio Bay, which feeds that whole bay system down there. And estuaries are extremely important, and they have to have freshwater inflow. If they don't, they become hypersaline, because again, the water is evaporating out of those. And so for the whooping crane and a whole lot of other critters, the flow from our springs is essential for their life and production in those estuaries. So a dam is an impediment to that. And one of the things that is counterintuitive, but dams, even dams that are supposed to be flood control dams, which is an incorrect term, they actually can speed up the flow of water downstream. The river before a dam, rivers in this kind of environment usually have a very sinuous path, kind of almost a sine curve as they go along. They naturally form that. But when you build a dam, particularly a big dam that backs up a lot of water, the water can go straight down through the dam, through that water. It doesn't have to follow that course, which would otherwise slow it down and retain a lot of the water there. So the dams that are supposed to limit floods, don't, except in the very extreme cases. And so that's another reason that rivers do better without dams. A suggestion, though, for something that the university could do, but also the community. In the last, probably maybe just the last 15 years or so, environmental education has kind of morphed into what they're calling place-based education, which is working pretty well. In the idea in place-based education is that instead of having kids of all ages, whatever ages there are, instead of having them study something way off and abstract, you have them study their own place because they know that place. They have some connection to it. It's tangible to them. Whereas if you're studying a river and you have students reading about the Amazon, well, wonderful, they can see videos and all about the Amazon, but they probably don't even know where it is. But if you have them study their own river, then there it is. And there are some programs. There's a school in Christchurch, Virginia. Its entire program is based on the Rappahannock River. And I mean, it's a fantastic thing. I would hope that the city of San Marcos and the San Marcos public schools, or our private schools, whatever, that are here, we've got such a tremendous opportunity to use this river for something like that, and to not only enhance and enliven the educational process, but to help people understand the value, to give them a sense of how important that river is. We take care of what we love. Jacques Cousteau said that, that's kind of a truism almost, that many people don't know anything about the river. They don't know why it's special. They don't know that it means something to them. And so I think we really need to consciously figure out ways to get people involved with the river in such a way that they develop this affection for it. And I think this river needs to be as important to it as it has been in the past. And the only way we can do that is to bring people's attention and affection to that river. I was at a powwow a few years ago down at the springs, and I love powwows, but here's the music, the drums going on, and it just transported me back 5,000, 6,000, 10,000 years ago, and thinking, whoa, this is the sound that this river has heard from people for a long time. First peoples that I've talked to, they say that the springs, at least in their legends, have always been a sanctuary place, a place that they realized was so important to all of them that they didn't kill each other there. So that recognition of the specialness of that goes way, way back.
I'd like to thank our guests, Todd Ahlman, Dr. Jim Kimmel, and Derek Lee, for their time. This wraps it up for the San Marcos History theme. October and November is all about spooky stuff and legends. So stay tuned for the next episode of COSMRadio. We'll hear stories from the books of Burt Wall, as well as other stories around the Devil's Backbone area. Do you have a creepy tale while driving late on Highway 32? If so, go to facebook.com/COSMRadio to share some of your ghost stories with our listeners, or you can email us at cosmradio@gmail.com. Our website is also about to launch, and you can check it out at cosmradio.org. Thanks for listening.